Hello everyone, Dakoba here, and welcome to Satisfactory. Previously, we had set up our computer factory in the Great Canyon north of our starter base. Now that's turning away, providing tons of circuit boards and computers for us. So today we're going to work hard to finish up Phase 3 and send off our next space elevator so that we can get into Phase 4 of the game, where we'll have access to things like the hover pack and drones. In order to do that, we're going to set up several new production lines, starting with heavy modular frames. Now, in order to accomplish this, we have a lot of work to do. We're going to take a look at some alternate recipes that will make our construction projects that much simpler and that much more efficient. We'll also take a look at how we'll be able to use blueprints to streamline the building process, and we'll start setting up a global logistics network by running our first large-scale rail lines. We have a lot to do today. Let's get into it. All right, now before we start, I want to let you guys know about a live stream that's happening on August 1st at 6 p.m. Central Time. So feel free to stop by and check it out if you want to play some Satisfactory. All right, we're going to get started today by taking a look at the map. See, between episodes, I went and did a whole bunch of exploration. If we open up our map here, you can see that I've explored virtually the entire half of the map. And I went around and gathered up about 25 different hard drives, as well as a whole bunch of Mercer spheres, summer sloops, and power slugs. And those are going to be really useful resources because they'll allow us to do things that will optimize our factory. Importantly, to let us use fewer machines so that we can streamline and simplify our factory production lines and make them easier to understand and easier to build. But perhaps more importantly are our hard drives. And so I have been chugging away. I've gone through 19 hard drives so far. Our 20th just finished, and we are looking for an important recipe, which is the encased industrial pipe. It allows us to remove coal from the production chain for a number of products that use encased industrial beams by using the iron pipe alternate, which we already have. So let's see if this hard drive is the one that has it. And yes, it is. We have it. Finally. Finally. Now this hasn't been an entirely fruitless endeavor. As you can see, we got what we were after, but we also found a number of other very valuable recipes like heavy oil residue and solid steel ingot. It's a bit of a bummer that they're on the same hard drive, but we'll grab one of those and then do the search for the other one later on. But we have what we need for heavy modular frames, which is the heavy encased frame recipe and the encased industrial pipe. Now, again, the encased industrial pipe is important because it allows us to use pipes instead of beams to make encased industrial beams, and pipes can be made from pure iron. If we take a look at this heavy encased frame recipe, we can see that that allows us to make modular frames, which are a pure iron recipe, encased industrial beams, which are now iron and concrete, pipes, which are iron recipe, and concrete, which is concrete. So we only need iron and concrete to make heavy modular frames. Now, the other advantage of this recipe is that it is significantly more efficient by about 35% compared to the default in terms of the number of materials that you need. If we take a look, we can compare these two recipes on screen right now, and we can see that the heavy encased frame will produce 3 modular frames. So if we multiply the resource costs of the default recipe, we would need 15 regular modular frames to make 3 heavy modular frames with the default recipe. With the heavy encased frame, we only need 8. In terms of pipe, we're going from 60 to 36 to produce 3. In terms of encased industrial beams, we're going from 15 to 10. And for our final resource, we are going from 360 screws, which works out to about 90 iron, to just 22 concrete, which is 66 limestone. So that is a significant improvement in resources across the board and absolutely critical for us to build a factory at scale that is relatively simple and easy to understand. Now, there are several other valuable resources we found, so we'll go ahead and leave some of those in there. We wanted to pick up the 2 that we'll use for heavy modular frames because we're going to use them straight away in our very next build. And the heavy oil residue I wanted to pick up because the solid steel ingot that it was paired with is so valuable. I want it to sort of go back into the pool and recycle so we have a chance of picking it up soon. But you can see some other valuable ones in here. For example, this diluted packaged fuel. This is going to be absolutely critical in our next power plant build, but I don't necessarily want to put the other recipe that it's with, this tempered copper ingot. I don't want to put that back into the pool until we're ready to use the diluted packaged fuel so that we have a better chance of getting those other more valuable recipes. So we're going to leave that alone. Now, At this stage of the game, the number of alternate recipes expands dramatically. Just the oil processing milestone adds over a quarter of the available alternates to the pool. There's 28 recipes, 28 alternate recipes locked behind it. So unlocking that milestone makes it much harder to get the recipes you want. But we're also getting to the point in the game where we really have the tools to go a little bit further afield and to find more drop pods. So we'll be able to take a look and play around with these. So let me know down in the comments what your favorite alternates are, and if you think there are any that we are missing on by not picking them up straight away. I'd love to hear from you. Now we're going to take the ones we have just unlocked and use them to build a heavy modular frame factory today. Now I've been playing around with the design for a heavy modular frame factory, but without that encased industrial pipe, I wasn't sure if we'd be able to do it without using steel. So I have been using a design that used a couple of foundries to produce the steel we'll need. Unfortunately, this design is no good anymore, so we're going to go ahead and scrap it. And I think we can just go ahead and jump into our build, and then we'll go back through and take a look at how everything works. All right, and that is a heavy modular frame factory all complete. It is chugging away, producing the heavy modular frames we need. You can see we still have some yellow lights. That's simply because our manifolds haven't filled. So that, for example, these last machines down here have not sort of fully saturated our iron belt lines. And so they are running a little slow right now, but in just a few minutes, those should catch up, which would cause these assemblers to spin up, which would cause these assemblers to spin up, which would fully saturate our modular frame line there. Everything else, I think, is caught up and ready to go. But let's go ahead and start at the beginning and take a look at these production lines. Let's pop over to our mining station. All right, here at our mining station, you can see we are tapping 2 pure iron nodes in order to draw out the 480 iron per minute each for the 960 in total that we need. You can see these are overclocked to produce the 480, and that is going to max out our Mark IV belts. So we have to make sure we're using Mark IV belts throughout the system, or we will see some slowdown. Now we're also bringing in limestone a little bit from right over there near our computer factory, and a little bit more from back here behind our oil refinery. So we're bringing those across. and feeding them into our train lines as well. And we still have some cleanup work to do on these belt lines, but they are providing the materials we need for now. Now we are transporting these via train, and that's going to cause a little bit of an issue with the iron. Let's pop on over to our factory and take a look. All right, we're over here at our factory site, and you can see that we used some blueprints. We'll talk about these here in a minute, but we are unloading our belt lines and then sending them into these arrays of smelters to be processed into iron ingots. Now, again, we need 2 belt lines of iron here, so we are taking the 16 smelters on the left and sending them along this belt line, which if we follow it around, we can see diverts separately from the 2 banks of smelters on the right, sending those into our production area. We're also taking our limestone and sending that into a set of constructors to be turned into concrete and then sent upstairs. Now the iron, we are down here, have our steel pipe production. And so we are using a large amount of iron, around 660 iron, in order to produce that. So this entire sort of right-hand belt line here, or I guess left hand if you go with the flow of materials, is being consumed, and we are merging the resources across from our second belt line to go upstairs. Now I mentioned that there's a little bit of an inefficiency here, and this is something I want to talk about. If we can watch while this train docks, what we'll see is that the flow of resources actually pauses for a moment, and that's a problem because we are producing and consuming the exact number of resources we need, which means that pause is going to also pause the machines. Eventually, it's going to cause the machines to run short on materials, but the train stations can't unload cargo while from the station into the belts while the cargo from the train itself is being loaded into the station. And so that is a bit of a problem for us. Now, fortunately, it's a fairly fixable problem, although the solution we're going to use is probably going to take a little bit. This is something that I should have planned for, made a mistake during the planning side of things. And the 2 solutions are, well, ultimately the solution is to make it so that we don't need to max out both of our belt lines. Now there are 2 ways we could do that. The first one, and the one we could do right now, is to add another station here and to use 2 sets of freight cars in order to move the materials. That would mean that each freight car in each station only needs to move 480 units of iron, and so it would be able to unload fully in between loads. And so that 20-second pause would occur at a time when the station wasn't in use anyways. And we would need to make sure we have a buffer set up for that. The other one, and the one we're probably going to use, which is a little bit easier to do, is to simply use faster belts. And so we'll probably save this and just accept that inefficiency until we unlock the Mark V belts, which hopefully will be fairly soon. We're looking at sending off that phase 3 space elevator today, and that'll be one of the first things we do in phase 4. Then we can come through and just replace these 2 belts here, and that will solve the issue, because it will allow us to sort of move those materials a bit faster. And then from that point on, the rest of the factory will be correctly tuned and correctly efficient. Now, as I mentioned, we're producing our pipes and concrete down here, and then we are sending those upstairs. So let's pop up and take a look. Now, we're also sending up a fair bit of leftover iron that we don't use downstairs. Remember, we're sending across 960, and we're using about 660 downstairs, and we're sending the rest up here. This is going into a manifold of constructors, and it looks like our manifolds haven't fully filled yet. It looks like we're backed up to around here right now. So we still need a little bit more iron to come through and finish filling our manifolds, and that will resolve those yellow lights over there. But we're also sending some iron back here to be turned into iron pipes. And so now I'm using a slightly different style of factory layout here. I wanted to try doing something with minimal splitters and mergers just to give it a try. And I also wanted to create the impression of a lot of movement within the factory floor. So I wanted to run a lot of parallel conveyor lines. And overall, I'm not unhappy with how it looks. The more I look at it, the less I like it, if I'm being honest. So it's something I'll probably play around with when I come back to decorate the factory. Let's see if we can simplify these production lines a little bit. It just feels a bit too busy here, but I do like the constant stream of motion and the neat organized lines. That looks good. But I chose to use Mark I conveyors because they can move the correct number of items, but they move more slowly. So the items take longer to get to their destination, and it creates this greater sense of motion throughout the factory. So I quite like that. Now, in terms of the production lines themselves, we are taking these constructors, and each pair is producing a set of iron plates as well as a set of screws and sending them into an assembler. This assembler is combining those to produce these reinforced iron plates. Those reinforced iron plates are being paired with the production of one of these constructors back here, producing iron rods. And so the plates and rods are then combined to produce modular frames, which flow into our final manufacture over there. Now, the other resources we're sending up are the concrete and steel pipe over here. So we send those around, and underneath this bank of assemblers over here, where they are turned into encased industrial beams using that encased pipe alternate we had just picked up. Now, that doesn't use all of the concrete and pipes because we do need some of those to be sent on and into the final manufacture as well. And so this is chugging along and producing the heavy modular frames for it for us. Let's pop on over and take a look. Now remember, we need 2 heavy modular frames a minute in order to satisfy the needs for our space elevator components that we want to build. We're producing 5, which means we're building up a stockpile of 3 extra. And we've completely filled our dimensional depot already, and we have already added 3 additional stacks there. But while this is running in the meantime, we can go ahead and throw some summer sloops in here, which will double the output without requiring a change in the input. Now, it will significantly increase the power cost, but it doubles the output essentially for free. And so that's a technique we'll be using throughout this, in particular when we get to looking at our space elevator parts. I think we're prepared to make the adaptive control units quite simply because we are building all of the component factories on site, but the modular engines are a daunting task, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. That's going to be part of our next factory build. All right, let's go ahead and get this place decorated. All right, and that is a heavy modular frame factory all decorated. You can see that we are using the signs to provide some lighting, and we are doing that with a console command that introduces a little bit of instability. This was present back in early access in update 8. The global illumination actually triggers crashes occasionally if you have this turned on, but it makes the lights look so much better. So it's something that you can choose to play with periodically, but you can see that unfortunately they don't have a huge range. You have to be quite close to them, but they make things light up so much better when you are nearby. And you can change the color and modify it. And it's every light source, including the lights on the machines, work well for that. I'm particularly a big fan of this smelting yard. I love how this turned out, and just the general feeling of it, especially at night. I think it looks great, and I'm very pleased with this. Now you'll notice I didn't do a whole lot of decorating on the top part, although I did rerun these belts. And while this crisscrosses a little bit more, I think that from this angle, it's a little bit easier to see where everything is flowing. We can see the plates and screws flowing into a assembler, and then that assembler pairs with the rods right next to it in order to produce the modular frame. So I think this does have a little bit more sensible flow to it, and I think that the elevated sort of crisscrossing belts actually looks a little bit better. So I think I like this one a bit better. But let me know down in the comments, which one did you like better, and how else do you guys like to lay out your factories? Like what aesthetic do you go for when you're laying your belts? Is it just spaghetti everywhere, or do you try and do things in neat orderly lines, or do something that looks cool with the sort of belt artwork? Now you'll notice I also didn't put anything else on top of this. That's because we're going to be building an additional factory on top of this here in a little bit. This is all part of a later design, and so you can see that this is sort of the left-hand side of what's going to fill this space, and we're very soon going to fill in this space. But for now, let's go ahead and pop on back to our, let's mark off that we have our, or here, have our heavy modular frame factory done, and let's pop on back and take a look at blueprints, because now that we have heavy modular frames, we can send off the Blueprint Designer Mark II and start taking a look at what those larger blueprints can do for us. All right, we are back here at the hub, and I forgot to bring enough computers, so let's check our lizard doggos real quick and see if we got lucky. We did not, but we did get some high-speed connectors. I also heard that we might have a doggo underneath these instructors over here. Yes, there we go. The original Grace. Oh, how wonderful. We found the fused modular frames there, so that is excellent news. All right, now I have a fourth lizard doggo in the pen, and that has been great. Unfortunately, we did not get the computers we were looking for, but that's okay. We actually have the resources to handcraft some. So let's get those crafted up and get this drop pod sent away, and then we'll head back out to the factory in order to take a look at blueprints. Now I use blueprints for a couple of different things, both for production lines, but also for aesthetics. One of the things I found, and I'll post a link to a short I made on it down below, is using them for gradients. So you can do a gradiated color scheme within your factory walls, and I'm really pleased with that. That has to do with how the custom color swatch can be applied to buildings, and then blueprints will actually store those custom color swatches, so you can then take that blueprint, place it anywhere in the world, and use it as a palette. Let's go ahead and get this sent away. Beautiful. All right, let's head on out and take a look at these blueprints. All right, now we are back out here at our blueprint spires, as I'm calling them. These stone pillars sort of centrally located to everywhere. You can see we're above our heavy modular frame factory and computer factory down on this side. You can see our steel tower rising just over there, and we aren't that far either from our coal power plant and ammunition platform as well. So very centrally located, which is good because blueprints are one of the things that I refer back to quite frequently. And whenever I start at a new building site, a blueprint designer usually just sort of ends up being plopped down there for me to work with. I think I have one back there. You can't see the blueprint designer itself, but you can see the shadow of it just poking around behind there, just behind that pillar there. Because blueprints are something you need to come back to periodically, or may need to, depending on how much time you want to invest in them. So for example, this is the smelter array that we are using down in our heavy modular frame factory. And I like using blueprints for things like this, because this is a very repetitive task. There's a lot of precision belt work going on here, and doing this for a large build where you might need 100 smelters or more, it certainly helps to be able to place them down 8 at a time and only have to worry about sort of your input and output belts. It can save a lot of sanity and a lot of carpal tunnel. And so in this case, we are only using 32 for our heavy modular frame so far, but we're actually going to be doing probably at least 4 more, maybe 6 more when we get over to our space elevator components over on the other side. And that's 6 more sets of these of 8. So another 48 potentially smelters, I think, today. I think probably only 32 more, but we'll see. But it's nice to have that. Now, one of the reasons I like having the blueprint designer nearby is suppose I decide I need a smelter array like this for copper. This one is set for iron, so all of these machines are preloaded with iron ingots, but we can simply go through, change all the machines over to copper, and then save that as a new blueprint, and then we'll have a second one there. And so that sort of modification, it's really nice to be able to make on the fly. The other thing I like to use blueprints for is to do entire production lines. And so here's another design for one I was working on. This was playing around with the idea of doing automated wiring, a space elevator component, as a blueprint. And I think I need one more assembler back in this corner, which I can fit, but I don't think I'm going to end up using. But this sort of production line where you can simply have your input belts along one side or perhaps feeding in on one quarter, and then having your outputs coming out on the other side, similar to what we're doing with the smelter array up there, but with multiple production steps, is really nice, because even if things are done at a very low rate, once you have the blueprint constructed, you can do things much faster. And so as an example for that, I think what we can do, let's go ahead and clear this out. This is our Mark II blueprint designer, so we have a bit more space here. I think we can actually fit heavy modular frames in this space. And it might take a little bit of clipping, but let's go ahead and see what we can do here. All right, now I went back through some old blueprints and I found this one here, which uses a number of alternate recipes, but it takes just some concrete and some iron, 11.6 iron and 100, takes a grand total of 134.27 iron ingots, as well as some concrete. And it produces 0.75 heavy modular frames per minute, or a frame about every minute and 20 seconds. And you can see that this fits in a Mark I blueprint designer. I'll leave this there in case anybody wants to take a look at it. But this is another example of how I like to use these blueprints, because this makes it a great component part in future factories for things like fused frames, where we're going to need a bunch of heavy modular frames on site. What we can do is simply have in a belt line of iron that diverts into these two inputs, and a belt line of limestone that diverts here. And just like that, we will have our heavy modular frames with very little work. And even though the rate on this particular blueprint is small, we can stack this up. It's no trouble at all to build 4 of these in a row and get 3 heavy modular frames per minute, or to build 8 or 12 or 100 of them, because that's the advantage of blueprints, is that they are very tileable and stack very neatly. Now, I will post this blueprint download with the save game, so you can find that in the description if you want to take a look at it. But I highly recommend you build your own blueprints for stuff like this, because it's a lot of fun. Now, the other thing I like to use blueprints for is something like our rail base, which is for building our rail network. And this is something that is new in 1.1, is the auto connect between different between rails. And so this is the sort of base structure that I'm going to be using for our global rail network, at least for this time. We may choose to come back through and either modify or expand this in some way, but for now, this is what we're going to be working with. You can see I'm running a hypertube line underneath it. I don't know how much we'll make use of that, but I figured it's good to have it in there. And then otherwise, it's simply a 2-track system on top of some steel frames. And overall, it's simple, it's to the point. It does have a couple of signs on it, but outside of that, there's not a whole lot of extra decoration to it. And ultimately, I think it looks quite nice down there in the world. You can see I used a couple of them there, and I think they are sort of minimalist, but still serve their purpose and work well. And I think that they will serve us well as we expand out into the desert, or possibly up here into the Titan Forest, or down into the Spire Coast or Rocky Desert beyond. Now, with this blueprint, we can go ahead and take a closer look at trains. So let's pop on down here and talk a little bit about how we're going to set up our trains and set up the signals for our trains, because that is an area that I get a lot of questions on. And fortunately, train signals are something that if you do them right, they can work very well and don't need to be all that complex at all. Now you can see we're using a right-handed rail system here, where the train sort of travels forward on the right, and trains traveling in the opposite direction will be coming in on the left. Now, right now we only have a single train, so we don't need to use any signals, but we are soon going to be adding to this, and that means we'll need to start setting up signals for all of our trains. Now, the rules for a successful train network are as follows. First of all, a given track should only ever allow travel in one direction. Now, we do make an exception for this with push-pull trains going into a terminal station, which is where a train line sort of travels out from the main line and terminates at a point, and then travels back along that same line and then remerges correctly with the main track line. But in general, if you have a track laid down, you're only going to want your trains traveling in one direction along that track. And so this double rail system works really well for that. Now, as far as signals go, there are two kinds of signals, and the first is a block signal. You're going to use these to break up your track into blocks that are about the same length as your longest train. And usually we say the longest train is either going to be 5 or 10 sort of cars long or vehicles long. And that's because of a 1-to-4 ratio between the engine and freight cars. If you have the sort of maximum slope on your tracks that the game will allow, then a single locomotive can only pull 4 cars of crate. If you add a 5th car, then the train will sort of fail to meet that rise and will start being pulled down the hill. Now, you can increase this by adding more locomotives. So you can have 2 locomotives and 8 freight cars, for example. Any more than that, and things start to get kind of silly. So generally we see blocks that are about 40 meters long or about 80 meters long, depending on what your maximum length of train is going to be. But obviously that can vary based on your train network. Now, in order to create blocks, you simply go into the transport tab and select the block signal and place it. Now, you want to place it on the correct side of your track. So you can see that we are in the build mode for the right-hand side. This is for a right-handed network, and that means that if the signal is on the right-hand side, it will sort of apply to this track in the direction we're facing. If it switches over to the opposite side, like right there, then it would apply in the opposite direction. You can see the arrow is pointing backwards compared to the direction we're facing there. So we want these to be on the right if we're in the right-handed side build mode, or we can press R to go into the left-handed side, and then it will function well. That's simply so you can sort of pick which side it's on for aesthetic purposes, but in general, you just want to make sure that the arrow is pointing in the correct direction for your trains to flow. Now, when you place a block signal, you can see that the color of the track changes there. And what this does is it creates a new block. So the purple block is present, and a train will not flow into a block if it is already occupied. You can see that the purple block is occupied by the locomotive we just built. So this locomotive has stopped before entering that block. If we delete that, then it will say that that block is cleared and this train can start traveling again. Now, by dividing the track up into blocks, we make sure that the trains never collide with each other and that they can move about. And for the most part, block signals will be 90% of what you use. For something like a train station like this, where it's a relatively simple interchange, we could simply pepper this with block signals at the end, at the beginning, and that would work just fine. But it wouldn't be very efficient. If we want to be a little bit more efficient, we'll want to use our other signal type, which is a path signal. All right, now path signals do two main things. The first, and perhaps the most important, is that they cause the game to do some extra calculations on a track. So in this case, we have this intersection that would allow a train coming from any direction to sort of exit in any direction as well. And so if we consider this train that's loading up over at our mining station, it's going to be coming down this path to the right-hand side here. And if it wants to travel straight on through on the right, then it will not interfere with a train that's traveling on the opposite side or that is interacting with that sort of third leg at all. And so a normal block signal would reserve the entire block while the train passes through it, but a path signal does the extra calculations to determine that this train only is going to stay on this right-hand rail, and so the rest of the rails are fine, as long as they aren't going to intersect with the rail that the train has sort of reserved through the path block. Now, the other thing that a path signal will do is prevent deadlock by making sure that trains can't stop within a path block. So this section, because we use a path signals on the entrances, is denoted as a path block, and that means that trains can't pause here. They will only enter this block if both the path block is clear, but also the exit block is also clear. So trains can only enter if they have somewhere to go. And that will prevent deadlock from occurring by trains sort of piling up and sort of getting in each other's way. It's like when two polite Canadians sort of are traveling in opposite directions down a hallway and they each try and get out of the other's way and step left and then step right and step left and on forever. We can avoid that by using path signals. Now, the rules for using path signals are fairly straightforward. You'll want to use a path signal at every entrance to an intersection and a block signal at every valid exit for the intersection. And so in this case, we have sort of 3 entrances and 6 exits, because each entrance can go in 2 directions. So we want to use a path signal on the entrance like we're using right here. And then from here, the trains can either travel straight on through, so we have a block signal marking that exit, or they can go right, and so we have another block signal marking there. If a train were coming from this direction, they would have a path signal as they come into the intersection, and from here, they could either go left, so we have a block signal on the track to the left that train could follow, or they could go right along here, and we use that same block signal that we saw from the other direction blocking here. On this side, we also have a path signal, and again, they can exit either by keeping to the right and hitting that block signal, or turning left and hitting this block signal. And so that's sort of the second rule is, in addition to your trains only traveling in one direction, you want to use path signals on the entrances to an intersection and block signals on the exits to an intersection. As long as you do that, your train network should not struggle at all. And of course, we'll use block signals to, divide out and mark off different sections of the rail network as well. Now, I think we are ready to extend this rail network further to the west there, because we're going to need to bring in some more resources. We've tapped everything in this area. We have just a little bit more crude over there in the center of our refinery, so we'll draw that out, but otherwise we're going to have to import anything we want to build within this area. So we're going to be heading out west down the Great Canyon and tapping some resource nodes out there to bring the items back for our space elevator parts. So let's start by extending our train network and then get this factory built. Let's get into it. All right, and that is a space elevator component factory for phase 3 all complete, or at least complete for now. I've spent quite a bit of time decorating this, and I think it's time for a break. There's quite a bit to do. The back hasn't really been finished, and there's lots of sort of flat walls that I think could benefit from some kind of texturing, whether that's through additional support structures or ventilation shafts or something. But we'll take a closer look at that. But you can see back here we haven't quite finished putting up the walls yet. But let's go through the production lines and then we can take a look at the decorations. Now we are starting out west. We ran our train lines all the way out near the Spire coast, and there is a set of iron nodes as well as some copper and limestone out there that we set up a station at and are bringing back 2 loads of iron. Now one of those is producing the last components we need for our adaptive control units, and the other one is providing for our modular engines. Now, both of those are being sent here into this train station where they are being unloaded. Now, you'll notice that I made this train station a little bit longer. That's because we may not be done here, and I don't necessarily want to have to run an additional train station, so we can, if we decide to, use these cargo areas to bring in some additional crude oil, for example, or some additional freight, and then send those anywhere else around the factory we want. And that may include if we want to expand this production as a component part of our phase 4 factories, or if we want to use this as an output for these components. So we send our adaptive control units and our modular engines, for example, into this station and send it on to another factory at a later time. But for now, we're simply using the first 2 platforms to bring in iron ore, and that is being sent into these 2 smelter arrays, which are sending the resources along. Let's take a look at this one first, which is for our adaptive control units. Now, the adaptive control units are ones that we have been working on for a while because they will use computers and heavy modular frames and circuit boards as 3 of the 4 components for it. The final component is automated wiring. So we're sending the iron over here into a bank of constructors to produce iron wire and steel pipes, and then sending more further on to produce a whole bunch of wire. Because the automated control units, the final component is automated wiring, which is made from stators and cable. Like that's a good place for a door, so we'll add a door to this location. So we're sending those resources up here. Now this large line of wire is coming over here to produce a huge amount of cable, and then the rest of the wire as well as the pipes are coming over here to make stators in these assemblers. Now those stators along with the cable are being sent into this bank of assemblers to produce the automated wiring itself, and then the automated wiring is being paired with circuit boards and computers from our computer factory, as well as heavy modular frames that we are piping across from our heavy modular frame factory over here underneath and around to come up here to produce our adaptive control units. Now this has been running for a little bit, and you can see we built up quite a decent little stockpile there. We certainly have more than the 100 we need to complete this phase, so we can go ahead and pick those up, and then we'll take those back to base here in a minute. Now the rest of the iron we're bringing in is being smelted over here, and we're also taking in crude oil. Now this crude oil pipe is actually coming from over in our refinery. I added another pipeline that crosses the bridge, and to differentiate it from the other pipelines there, I went ahead and gave it a slightly different color scheme. This also gives a little bit of visual contrast to that frame. So you can see that it is a copper pipe that is bringing the crude oil across from our refinery over here. And it is just being sent through our factory and over here into this area. So this is raw crude coming in and being sent into a pair of refineries down here. Now the crude comes over here to go into this refinery, which is producing rubber as well as heavy oil residue, and the rubber is being sent along and upstairs because that's one of the components in our modular engines. And the heavy oil residue is being turned into fuel, which is being buffered through these 2 tanks and then sent up into some fuel-powered generators. Now, these 2 tanks aren't strictly necessary. I placed them because I wasn't ready to build the generators, but I wanted to keep the production flowing. I wanted everything else to keep working. And so they've had a chance to sort of fill up a bit, but we're not actually relying on them to sort of regulate the flow of any fuel or anything like that. They're at this point more of a decorative piece, and we're just going to leave them intact because they're already there and there's no point to remove them. But the iron, as well as the rubber, are being sent up to the 3rd floor of our factory here. We can pop up here and take a look at it. where it is being turned into our modular engines. The iron is starting by being split out into 3 separate production lines, the first of which is producing a ton of wire using these iron wire constructors here in the middle. And that wire, the line on the left, is going into constructors making screws and plates to make reinforced iron plates. And then the line on the right is being turned into steel pipes. Now, the iron pipe and the wire are being combined into rotors to pair with the reinforced iron plates to make smart plating in that assembler there. And then over here, we are making stators and rotors so that this one can make motors and sending those in. And so the motors, the rubber, and the smart plating are the components for our modular engines. Now you'll see that we aren't producing the 10 modular engines per minute that we had originally set out to do. That was a combination of factors. The logistics task of that is pretty daunting, but more importantly is power. If we take a look at our power graph, you can see that we are, our maximum consumption is way over our production rate, but that our active consumption is also sort of dipping dangerously close. So we wouldn't have had the opportunity to double this production line without building another power plant. This means that a power plant is absolutely our top priority at this stage, but since we were able to get the components we need with a smaller factory, we're going to accept this for now. Now, as far as the decoration of the place, I drew heavily from the trailer for, I think it was update 5 or update 6, which has some really interesting geometry in the factory build. And I wanted to play with that. I do still think this needs some work. I think that perhaps we can place some vents or other things to sort of break up the large flat panels that still are all around the place. Something like this wall could use a little bit of texture and depth to it. But otherwise, I'm pretty pleased with how it turns out. I think it has some interesting shapes and color lines and things like that. And I think if we step back and take a look at it from a little bit further away, as long as we ignore the back of it and the unfinished parts of the walls, then we can get a really nice look of the area. And overall, I'm very pleased with how this factory has shaped up. I like the focal point around the train line passing through the factory underneath. And overall, I'm very, very pleased with this area. So let's go ahead and get these space elevator parts and head back home and send off the space elevator and open up phase 4. All right, let's pop on over here and load up these adaptive control units and these modular engines. Let's jump up to the top of our tower and grab our versatile frameworks. And our versatile framework. Oh, one of these days I'm going to learn to count. All right, let's go ahead and get the space elevator sent away. And I think that is where we are going to leave it for today. In our next episode, we're going to start off by building a fuel power plant, probably a packaged fuel power plant, but I have some ideas for how I want to make it something a little bit more extensible, a little bit more special, where we can leave some room for future processing into turbo fuel and then eventually into rocket fuel as well. So we'll be playing around with that idea. And we're also going to get started with our first Tier 7 milestones, which I think are going to be centered around aluminum production. We may set up a small temporary aluminum factory that'll give us access to things like the hover pack, and then from there we can play around with setting up something a little bit more permanent. But I hope that you have enjoyed this episode, and I hope that it has made your day just a little bit better. Leave a like if it has, and subscribe if you would like to see more. My name is Dakoba, and I hope you have an efficient day. I will see you soon.